Thanks. The next speaker is Professor Jon Foreman. Professor Foreman completed a BS in biology at the College of William and Mary in '78 and then studied veterinary medicine at the University of Georgia. He also did a master's degree at exercise physiology from Washington State and is a diplomate of the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine. He has been at the University of Illinois since 1985, and he is currently professor and associate dean at the University of Illinois. Jon is also a registered FEI veterinary official in both eventing and reining and has worked at numerous international 3-star and 4-star events in the United States. Thanks. Jon's talk is he's contracting his 2 talks and into one. So the main topic is what is the case for using low levels of NSAIDs in competition. Thanks, Jon.
Thank you, Wayne. Your Royal Highness, distinguished members of the FEI, we're now really at the crux of the matter, which is what are the effects of half-dose nonsteroidals. Nope, I was told to do it. The recently proposed FEI rule change regarding half doses of flunixin and phenylbutazone would allow only one nonsteroidal to be given at a time, only when administered by a veterinarian, and only once every 24 hours, and would not, and one of the keys is not closer than 12 hours prior to competition. And not to state the obvious, but FEI disciplines aren't all the same. Endurance occurs all in one day, whereas a number of other disciplines occur on sequential days with either different classes or different portions of scores accumulated over time in a team event, for instance. And there are at least 2 disciplines where the discipline itself frequently occurs over a several-day period, the obvious being eventing and driving. As a result, then, in some sports, not endurance, but in other FEI disciplines, we have horses competing on a series of days, and at the end of the day, as the horse is trying to recover, the idea behind the rule change would, as I understand it, would be that at the end of that day of competition, the horse would be allowed a half dose of either flunixin or phenylbutazone, and then overnight not be allowed any more drug, and then the next day would go back into competition at some point the next day. So the real crux of the matter then becomes, is that half dose effective the next day when the horse goes back to compete the second day or the third day in one of these multidisciplinary competitions? The problem is that half doses really have not been reported anywhere in the scientific literature to this point in time. We gave an abstract from our lab at a recent meeting in Anaheim in May, and there are no data in the literature on the effects of a half dose of flunixin, and there are no data in the literature on plasma concentrations resulting from half doses of either phenylbutazone or flunixin. In our laboratory, it was alluded to earlier by Dr. McElraith, in our laboratory, what we do to study pain, and anytime we talk about studying pain, it's always potentially controversial. I mean, this is not my favorite kind of study to do. There are lots of things I'd rather be doing, teaching or seeing my kids or something. But when we study pain in our lab, the way we do it is we use a mechanical heart bar shoe, like you see pictured on the screen here. And so at the bottom of the shoe, at the heel of the shoe, the bar is hinged on a rotating pivot. And in the midfoot bar, there's a hole on the solar surface, on the ground surface of the shoe. And so when the horse is wearing this, if we take a small hexagonal head Allen screw and tighten it into the midfoot bar, it tightens the frog bar up against the frog of the foot and pinches the horse's foot. And we can make them lame as a result. That lameness is nonsteroidal responsive. It's immediately reversible when we take the screw out. And one of the nice things about it is that each horse can serve as its own control. So Here are data from our laboratory a number of years ago. We've used this model for 23 years in our lab in various studies. Here are data from a number of years ago, which basically show that the more lame we make the horse, the higher the heart rate gets. Whoops. So if we have heart rate, and most of my graphs will be set up like this with time on the x-axis and heart rate on the y-axis. And you can see that at rest, if we make the horse lame, you can see why I'm an internist instead of a surgeon like Dr. McElroy. They don't let me touch anything sharp except Vacutainer needles. On the x-axis, here you can see that if we tighten the shoe and we make the horse a little bit lame or more lame, the heart rates are different depending on how lame the horse is. Then these horses trotted for 2 minutes on a treadmill, and then these are recovery heart rates over a 60-minute period. And again, you can see that there's a difference between the moderately lame horses and the slightly lame horses in their heart rates. And so we're going to use heart rate as a variable in a number of the rest of the studies that I'm going to show you. We do blindly score these horses' lamenesses at rest. It's basically based on the AAP lameness grading scale. We do not take them out of their stalls and jog them, because then that would negatively affect our ability to use heart rate as a variable. So we monitor their lameness in the stall at rest and use a number of different factors in observing them. The person doing the lameness scoring does not have any knowledge whatsoever of drug assigned or dose assigned whenever we do a study like this. The model is local anesthetic responsive. If we, excuse me, if we administer a local anesthetic and block the heels of the horse, you can see the heart rate drops right down. So the model it blocks out with a heel block, so it blocks out like a navicular horse. And the model has been used, not in research sponsored by FEI, but it's been used by FEI in work in the meantime, thank you, where we had a graduate student look at capsaicin and look at whether or not applying capsaicin in the same way over the digital nerves would cause the horse's lameness to diminish after putting capsaicin on. So here are heart rates or lameness scores, take your pick, both of which show that there's a response to capsaicin over the digital nerve, causing the lameness to diminish and the horses to essentially become sound or nearly sound. So this, as part of the FEI's effort to look at capsaicin, these data were used to show efficacy and to help write a rule against capsaicin in the recent past. We're going to talk then about doses and single doses and half doses. And so I'm not going to use these numbers over and over and over again because you'll go blind. So I'm going to talk about single doses, and when I talk about single doses, these are the numbers that I mean for the veterinarians in the room that are rapidly scribbling. So to us, a standard dose is 4.4 milligrams per kilo of phenylbutazone, 1.1 of flunixin, 2.2 of ketoprofen. All of our studies have been done giving it IV, not oral, except for some kinetic work at the end. If we give a standard single IV dose of phenylbutazone to horses that have this lameness in place, we see a response. So here are negative control horses. Here are horses made lame and without any drug. You can see that their heart rates stay elevated in the 50 to 55 mean range along here. If we give them drug at 1 hour on this axis, if we give them drug here, you can see that phenylbutazone causes their heart rates to decrease and then gradually increase again as the drug wears off. For the scientists in the room, all the asterisks on all these slides are at p less than 0.05. For the non-scientists, when you see an asterisk, it means there was a statistically significant difference between the two curves that we're comparing. And if there's no asterisk, it means that we're really not allowed as scientists to say that these two lines are different from one another. And the reason for that is the variability between the horses causes those lines to be indistinguishable from one another scientifically. We look at lameness score for the same study. This is the study Dr. McElraith alluded to earlier. If we look at the lameness score for the same study, you can see that the lame horses stayed lame the whole time. If we give them phenylbutazone at a standard dose, their lameness scores improve and stayed improved throughout this 8-hour post-treatment period. Plasma phenylbutazone concentrations in this situation, again, Wayne mentioned this earlier, were 7.2 to 7.6 mean, with very little variability at the point at which the study was ended and at the point at which at least heart rate was waning as a positive effect on from the drug. The second talk I was supposed to do today was on combined use and of different nonsteroidals. And basically I can summarize that 20 minutes in one slide, which is combined use depends, and the efficacy of combined use of different nonsteroidals depends tremendously on the choice of drugs. So if you choose phenylbutazone and ketoprofen and combine them at the same time, they actually have a synergistic effect. Because the ketoprofen, even though it's not a great analgesic, it works earlier, and then once the phenylbutazone kicks in, then you get the longer duration of the phenylbutazone. And so over time, synergistically, you get a better effect than either drug alone. So it definitely depends on the drugs that you combine, and it also depends on the timing after administration as to whether or not they're effective at a given point in time. Different combinations are legal under current rules in the US. There are a number of people in the room who've fought very hard over the last 6 to 12 months to change that rule. There was a vote held in January at the USEF meeting, and that rule has been changed to be effective next year, where we would go and make the rule more restrictive and have only one nonsteroidal legal in competition, not two. So we are certainly moving away from the concept of stacking or using multiple nonsteroidals in competition. There's no doubt that if you take a nonsteroidal and give it at a standard dose and you exercise the horse at the right time, that there is a masking effect. Masking used meaning hiding lameness or covering up lameness or alleviating lameness. There's no doubt that at the right time, there's a masking effect from using nonsteroidals. So here, this slide's very similar to what I showed you earlier. Horses are made lame. An hour later, right here, they're either given saline as a negative placebo, phenylbutazone or flunixin at standard doses, and you can see that whether they got phenylbutazone or flunixin at standard doses, there was a dramatic response compared to negative control, statistically significant through that 4 hours pre-exercise. And then we actually took these horses, here are the lameness scores, they look very similar. And then we took those horses and exercised them on a treadmill very briefly, 2 minutes at a walk, 2 minutes at a trot, and then looked at their recovery heart rates. And again, their recovery heart rates were definitely lower, statistically lower than the negative control horses. So if you time it right, with the right dose and the right timing, it is possible to cover up or hide or mask a lameness using a nonsteroidal, even at a standard dose. That brings us back then to the reason we're all here, which is, what about a half dose? Because I haven't showed you any half dose yet, right? You're hanging on breathlessly, I'm sure. So with kind sponsorship of FEI this summer, our kids go back to school in America this week, and my kids go back Thursday. I have 120 new first-year vet students showing up Thursday at 8 o'clock, bright and early for orientation. And one of the first things my kids' teachers will ask them will be, what did you do with your summer vacation? And so this is what I did with my summer vacation, or a lot of the rest of these slides. This is older work that we did a number of years ago that basically shows, again, negative control here, different group of horses, negative control along the top, phenylbutazone at a single dose along the bottom, and you can see that it's effective now. This hour 13 is 12 hours after administration. So for 12 hours after administration, a single dose still has a positive effect on heart rate or lameness score in our model. But a half dose is only effective for a very brief period of time, right here, and then it wears off, and the horses go back to looking no different than a negative control. So from this point, which is I think 6 hours on through the end of the experiment, the half dose horses were no different than the negative control horses. Lameness scores look very similar. This is single and double dose. Double dose has been alluded to earlier in some of the French work. Double dose really doesn't get you that much more as far as efficacy. It might help with duration, but we haven't ever looked beyond 12 hours. Double dose and single dose were the same. Half dose was effective only for a very brief period of time here, early after administration, and for 8 hours afterwards. There was no effect on lameness score from a half dose of phenylbutazone. So for heart rate, from 3 hours and 40 minutes to 5 hours afterwards, there was a positive effect. And for lameness score, from 3 hours 40 to 4 hours, for only a brief 20-minute period, were we able to show a positive effect from giving a half dose of nonsteroidal. This is, in fact, if we were to go back and flash through all the slides we saw this morning, there were 2 sets of slides that got blown by very, very quickly in the French models that showed that at half doses, their predictions were that on stride length that it would stop working at 6 hours. And that work is in keeping with what we can show you here from real horses getting drug. This is work. This is both flunixin and phenylbutazone combined efficacy studies that we've done. I put them both on the same graph to make it easier for you. So here's negative control. Again, this is 10 horses this summer. 10 horses, 5 thoroughbreds, 5 quarter horses. 2 of the quarter horses are appendix quarter horses, so they're mostly thoroughbreds. To show you my level of confidence in this model and its reversibility, I own 3 of these thoroughbred horses that are in this study. So I'm fully confident that they'll go back this fall and be productive members of the University of Illinois riding program, which my wife coaches. But they had the summer off, so I made them go to work. So here you can see that, again, half-dose phenylbutazone is very briefly effective. Half-dose flunixin is effective more demonstrably, but still from 6 hours to 12 hours after treatment, there's no demonstrable effect of half-dose flunixin. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at the 12-hour limit that is part of the rule that's being proposed. At 12 hours after administration, it's not effective clinically. So there will be no masking effect the next morning if there's a jog or if the horse has to compete first thing the next morning. There is no masking effect 12 hours later from either phenylbutazone or flunixin given at these doses. I've worn the clicker out. Here we go. Very briefly, I won't bore you with this. I have 2 slides on this. We have also, as part of this project this summer, done crude kinetic work, I would call it. Basically, we have looked at 12-hour and 24-hour troughs after administration of 5 days of either oral phenylbutazone, IV phenylbutazone, oral flunixin, or IV flunixin. So we've done 4 different perturbations of this. Basically, the phenylbutazone, you can see that there's a peak around 12 micrograms per mil at 12 hours. Is that right? Nope, sorry, it's not the units I couldn't see, between 1 and 1.5. The peak here, the highest peak is 2.3 after IV medication. The highest peak is 2.5 micrograms per mil. The standard deviation there is 1. So these data, these information have been provided to the veterinary committee and to the list group to look at and to study to determine where they might choose to set plasma concentrations for phenylbutazone and flunixin. So I'll conclude with these last 2 slides. Half-dose phenylbutazone and flunixin are clinically effective only for very brief periods of time. They're not effective for 6 hours or more before the end of the proposed 12-hour window when competition would not be legal under this proposed rule change. The clinical effects stop easily within that 12-hour window. And so I would ask you this simply. If there are no lingering effects of half-dose phenylbutazone or half-dose flunixin at the end of that 12 hours after administration, and if you embrace the code of conduct which says that the welfare of the horse is paramount and that every effort must be made to ensure that horses receive proper attention after they have competed, then I would simply ask, is it not logical to at least consider allowing half-dose uses to be used at the end of the day before the horse competes again the next day, either in the same combined training event or in a different FEI dressage class, if the data here show that it's not effective 12 hours later? Thank you.